When you shine with no boundary, those in shadow will gather to feed. The empath who does not protect their light becomes a vessel for the darkness of others. There comes a point in the life of every sensitive soul, every finely tuned spirit, when the burden of feeling too much becomes unbearable, and this unbearable weight is so often not their own. You, who have walked into a room and felt the sorrow with no words spoken, who have carried home the anxieties of strangers as if they were your own cross to bear, you are not imagining things, you are not weak, nor are you cursed. You are something far rarer. You are an empath. But I am here to tell you tonight, with all solemnity, that your gift is in danger of being devoured. When the light in a soul shines too brightly, when it belongs not to a persona but to a deeper inner fire, the darkness comes not only to witness, but to consume. The unconscious, in its profound hunger for its own wholeness, attracts its opposites, and so you, as the light-bearer, will inevitably draw in those who have lost their own. But this is not merely about social dynamics or psychological compatibility. No, it is a spiritual alchemy of the most dangerous kind. The empath is often initiated not by choice, but by survival. Their profound perceptual ability is a mechanism developed in childhood, perhaps from walking on eggshells around an unpredictable parent, or from absorbing the chaos of a world too overwhelming to face directly. And so the empath's body becomes a listening chamber, their soul a sponge. They adapt by attuning themselves to every nuance, every flicker of another's emotional flame. But what begins as adaptation becomes identity, and what becomes identity attracts its polarity in nature. For every empath, there is a narcissist waiting to complete the loop. I do not speak here of narcissism in the casual, everyday sense of vanity or selfishness, no. The narcissist of whom I speak is an archetype, a symbol, a reflection of the fragmented self who, having banished their own pain, seeks to feed on the light of another. Where the empath feels too much, the narcissist feels too little. Where the empath gives relentlessly, the narcissist takes shamelessly. One bathes in the ocean of another's feelings. The other builds a fortress to avoid their own. They are drawn to each other not by romance or destiny, but by symbolic compensation. The law of the unconscious demands balance, and so the unhealed light-bearer will call forth the shadow-devourer. This is not an accident, it is an unconscious ritual, a reenactment of some ancient dream in which light and shadow try to remember that they were once one. But be warned, this union is not sacred unless both are awake, and too often, only one carries the burden of waking. You, the empath, may believe that your role is to heal what is broken, to fill another's emptiness, to love the unlovable back into wholeness. This belief is not compassion, it is a possession, not by demons or devils, but by an archetype too large for one soul to carry alone. It is the wounded healer, Chiron, whose agony becomes his path and his prison. The danger then lies not in your light, but in your identification with it. The narcissist feeds on this identification. Not consciously, they are often not the villain in their own eyes, but unconsciously, they seek what they have banished. You become the mirror they cannot break. Your empathy becomes the fuel that allows them to bypass their own pain, because in your presence, they cease to feel empty for a while. If this idea of the light-bearer and the shadow is already sparking a new perspective for you, a part of you that has felt unseen for so long, take a gentle moment to subscribe to Mind Decode Explained. We journey through these intricate landscapes of the mind together, seeking not just answers, but understanding. But like a vampire who fears its own reflection, they will eventually resent you for what you show them. And you, dear soul, will feel as though you are dying. For you are not your body, you are your very self. Each compromise, each suppression of your truth to preserve the connection, is a slow sacrifice upon the altar of another's denial. You will have dreams of drowning, of being chased, of houses with no exits. These are not mere symbols. They are the cries of your unconscious, begging you to wake up, to see that what you call love is often self-erasure, that what you call loyalty is sometimes trauma reenacted. A feeling that echoes what Brené Brown describes as a core component of shame. the fear that our imperfections make us unworthy of connection. The empath, in their boundless giving, often bypasses the vulnerability of setting boundaries, mistaking total self-sacrifice for true connection. But do not despair. The pain is not a punishment, it is a portal. To leave such a dynamic is not a betrayal, it is a liberation. And to liberate yourself from such an entanglement is to reclaim your own light, not as a gift to be consumed, but as a force to be integrated. For your light is not meant to save others, it is meant to guide you. Empathy without boundaries is self-destruction. Love without discernment is codependency. And healing another without first healing yourself is spiritual martyrdom, not transformation. The path forward is not to dim your light, nor is it to harden your heart. It is to know thyself, to look not only into the eyes of another, but into the mirror of your own psyche. It is to meet your own shadow, to own your projections, to discern the difference between divine guidance and emotional entanglement. It is only when the empath recognizes their own narcissism, the part of them that needs to be needed, the part that fears abandonment so deeply it will tolerate anything to avoid it, that the loop can be broken. For just as the narcissist consumes, the empath unconsciously offers themselves up to be consumed. This is not holiness, it is self-forgetting. In this dark mirror, you must ask, who benefits when I silence my truth? Who is nourished when I dim my knowing? What part of me believes I must suffer in order to be loved? These questions are the keys, but you must turn them slowly, gently. The door they open is ancient. Behind it lies not only your freedom, but your power. And that power is not to fix another, but to see them without losing yourself. You must understand this. The unconscious is not evil. It is amoral. It cares not for your comfort or survival. It seeks wholeness at any cost. And so, as you walk through life as a beacon, unprotected and unaware, the unconscious of another will reach out, not to greet you, but to absorb you. Their unintegrated shadow recognizes in you what they cannot find in themselves, not love but completion, not connection but consumption. This is the archetypal tragedy of the empath, born with the gift of inner resonance, yet cursed with the delusion that another can be saved through self-sacrifice. And it is here, in this delusion, that many are lost. The line between martyrdom and meaning blurs, and what was once a calling becomes a compulsion. If you are consistently exhausted after being with certain people, this is not a defect in your nervous system. It is the scream of your soul. The body, as the psychiatrist and trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk reminds us, keeps the score. It holds the wisdom the mind refuses to acknowledge. Empaths so often try to rationalize their way through emotional vortexes. Perhaps I'm just too sensitive, they say. But this is not sensitivity. This is submersion. You are drowning in the unconscious of another and calling it love. The most dangerous thing an empath can do is take responsibility for another's transformation. The narcissist, or rather the archetype of the devourer, will never change because you overextended yourself. They change when the mirror shatters, when the supply is cut off, when the performance of the relationship no longer earns the applause of your attention. They change not when you love them more, but when you leave. And even then, only if the soul is ready. But this truth is often unbearable for the empath, whose trauma script says, if I love hard enough, I will finally be safe. You learned this not in adulthood, but in childhood. You learned to appease the tempers of grown-ups, to anticipate the moods of those who held your very survival in their hands. You became attuned not because it was noble, but because it was necessary. And what was once an adaptation has become an addiction to fixing, to peacekeeping, to being the medicine for wounds you did not create. But I tell you, the child was innocent, but the adult must awaken. The narcissist does not just mirror your opposite, they reveal the part of you that still believes you do not matter unless you are useful. That belief is your prison. And unless you dismantle it, you will continue to attract the hungry, who will smile at your warmth while sipping from your soul. Not because they are evil, but because you have allowed it. You have opened the gates without asking, what am I protecting? Who guards the guardian? You must learn a new form of love, not the kind that bends until it breaks, but the kind that contains, the love that has structure, the love that says, I will not abandon myself for you. That is the love that heals, not just the other, but you. And therein lies the paradox. Empaths seek to be loved for who they are, but so often they hide that very self in the quest for acceptance. They shapeshift, they edit, they absorb, they accommodate, until one day they no longer recognize their own reflection. This is the wound, and this is also the warning. If you do not come home to yourself, another will continue to feed on you, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Because if you refuse to set a boundary, life will set it for you in the form of a breakdown, in the form of burnout, in the shattering of the illusion that love is synonymous with suffering. The myth of the empath is not just personal, it is collective. You carry the pain of your lineage. You dream the dreams of ancestors who were never seen, never heard, never held. Your heart is a temple for unspoken grief, and your task is not to carry it further, but to transmute it. That transmutation begins when you say, no more. No more abandoning yourself for validation. No more confusing intensity with intimacy. No more calling trauma bonds soulmates. No more sacrificing your peace to be someone's peacekeeper. The world does not need more exhausted healers. It needs awakened ones, whole ones, fierce ones, people who have learned to protect their energy, not through withdrawal, but through discernment. And what is discernment? It is the quiet courage to name what you feel before it becomes convenient. It is the sacred pause before you say yes, when your soul is screaming no. It is the act of choosing yourself, not as an act of selfishness, but as a spiritual responsibility. For if your well is dry, what truth can you give? Let me be clear. You are not too much. You never were. You have been giving too much to those who could not hold it, and that is not your fault. It is your pattern. But a pattern, once made conscious, becomes a portal. This is alchemy. This is the moment your empathy becomes your power, not your sentence. The danger is real, dear one, not because people are monsters, but because they are wounded. And a wound will seek its medicine, even if that means draining the healer, especially if the healer does not yet know their own worth. But now you do. The psyche calls for balance, and balance for the empath often means learning the language of limitation. It means discovering that love is not measured by how much you can endure, but by how much truth you can hold, including your own. This is the beginning of what Carl Jung called individuation, not the path of merging with another, but the path of returning to the self. Every empath must face this sacred threshold, this fear of being selfish. But this fear is not the voice of your higher self. It is the echo of old programming, the one that told you your needs were an inconvenience, your emotions too loud, your truth too costly. But let me ask you, how long will you pay that price? How many times will you betray your intuition because someone looked sad? How many nights will you spend trying to solve for emotions that were never yours to begin with? The empath's heart is a compass, but only if you let it point inward first. If you only use your sensitivity to attune to the chaos around you, you become an antenna for suffering. But if you turn that sensitivity inward, it becomes vision. Vision into what is real. Vision into the architecture of your soul. Vision into the subtle movements of energy that whisper, this is yours, and this is not. Do you know what happens when an empath awakens? They stop apologizing. They stop shrinking. They stop over-explaining their boundaries to people who benefited from their absence. They begin to shine, not as lanterns for another's darkness, but as torches, fierce, rooted in self-knowledge, no longer begging for a seat at another's table, but building their own altar, not of martyrdom, but of truth. This is what the world fears, the empath who remembers their power. Because when you remember, you cease to be manipulable. You cease to be available for emotional vampirism disguised as connection. You stop confusing chaos with chemistry, and you begin to ask a deeper question. Does this relationship honor the person I am becoming? That question is a sword that cuts through illusion. It is the filter through which every bond must pass. And it does not mean you become cold or unfeeling. It means you become clear, and clarity is the most potent expression of love. I must tell you this. Not everyone who claims to need your light is meant to have it. Some will come with seductive wounds and compelling stories. Some will weep in your arms while sharpening daggers behind your back. Others will genuinely love you, but only the version of you that is small enough not to threaten their own stagnation. Your light is holy, but it is not charity. You do not owe your soul to every outstretched hand. Even Christ had discernment. Even the saints walked away. Even the healers rested. So if you feel a pull toward someone, pause. Ask, is this resonance or repetition? Is this intuition or an old wound seeking resolution? Because not every pull is sacred. Sometimes it is trauma dressed up as destiny. Sometimes it is the inner child in you whispering, maybe this time I will be chosen. But you must choose yourself first. You must become the parent your wounded heart never had, the protector who says, I will not abandon you again, not even for love. You see, the final warning for the empath is not that others are dangerous, but that your own unhealed need to be needed is the most dangerous thing of all. When you nourish others with your essence, believing that love must cost you your vitality, you repeat the ancient story of self-erasure. And that story does not lead to liberation, it leads to depletion. But when you see the pattern, when you hold it in your hands and say, I see you, you reclaim the pen, you write a new chapter, one where you are not a sponge for the world's feelings, but a vessel for truth, a place where your light does not flicker with exhaustion, but burns steady with purpose. And that purpose is not to save others from their darkness, but to embody the truth that wholeness is possible. Not by absorbing pain, but by transmuting it. Empath. Your gift was never your suffering, it was your vision. The ability to feel what others could not, to perceive what was hidden. But with this gift comes the responsibility to protect it, to guard it, to revere it. Let your yes be sacred. Let your no be a mantra that seals your field. Let your presence be a blessing, but never a buffet. You are not the answer to everyone's hunger. You are not a remedy. You are not a savior. You are a soul, sovereign and seen. And when you finally believe that, the world will stop feeding on you and start respecting you.